Okay, we left off Parshat Hazinu, Pasuk Vav. In the previous Pasuk, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael that whenever we behaved in a corrupted manner, which means transgression, we should understand that we're not victimizing Hashem. We are ultimately the victims, because anything we do, we are consequentially affected by our misbehavior. You see, this goes back to the fundamental of creation. If Hashem, which He is perfect on the absolute level, and this is the reason why Rav Chaim Volozhin had said in the Nefesh HaChaim, when we say a bracha, bracha to Hashem, many people make a mistake. You're blessing God. If God is perfect on the absolute level, blessings always, you need a blessing. One is a beneficiary of a blessing because the blessing compensates for something the person does not have. But if Hashem is perfect on the absolute level, what's possible to bless Hashem? It's a statement of heresy. You're deficient, and my blessing will address that deficiency. I'm giving you a blessing. So Rav Chaim Volozhin explains the understanding Baruch Atah Hashem means you are the source of all blessing. Hashem is the source of all. Baruch Atah Hashem, you are the source of all blessing. So now the basic question is, so if God is perfect on the absolute level, why did He create existence? Why does He need it? The moment we say the word need means He doesn't have something. That means there's a deficiency. Again, we're going back to the original problem. That's not reality. So if that's the case, what was the impetus or the need to create existence? Did He have a need to create an existence? So the Ramchal says this very clearly, and everybody says the same thing. God has no needs because God is perfect. God is infinite. The reason why God created existence is because since God, Hashem, is good on the absolute level, something which is good does good. Not needs to do good, does good. So since creating existence in the context of a human being having free choice, that man should be a beneficiary of his choice. And the ultimate benefit is to be able to have a relationship with the ultimate good. That is good doing good. That's why God created existence. Since we're not doing it for God, we're doing it for ourselves. We find Rashi says many times when we in the Chumash Vayikra, when you bring a korban, a sacrifice, it says reich nichoch Hashem. You're bringing a reach, creating a fragrance, which is nichoach, which is pleasant to Hashem. It seems to be we're doing God a favor by bringing a korban, by serving Him. So Rashi says always, cites Chazal, reich nichoch Hashem. Now that you've done my will, now you'll be a beneficiary of my original intent. You'll be a beneficiary of the goodness. That's Reich Nichot Hashem. Now that you've done for God, because the Navi says, why did God create existence? L'chvodi barosiv. God created the world for His own glory. What does it mean for His own glory? God needs no glory. As we said, if you acknowledge God's glory, then you're beneficiary to have a relationship. And that relationship is the ultimate. Because now you have a relationship with something which is good on the absolute level. That is l'chvodi barosiv. That's the understanding. So don't think for a moment, by doing the wrong thing, transgressing, and acting defiantly or independently of God, we're doing anything negative to Hashem. Shichas lo lo banav mumam. When we act corruptedly, we're only affecting ourselves. He's not the victim. God is never victimized. It's not possible. As a result of that, the whole thing is foolishness. It's a misunderstanding. You don't understand what you're doing to yourselves. It's like a child who acts and threatens the parent. He's not going to do something which is not in his own best interest. The parent says, okay, so don't eat, don't sleep. You'll feel the consequences of your behavior. That's what it is. So that's what we said. That a person, and it's interesting, the Gemara tells us that there's the two ways you could be matit neder, you could undo a neder, nullification of vows or oaths. It's either hatorah or charota. What's hatorah? The word hatir means to undo. If I would have known, I wouldn't have. Person makes a neder, and then he realizes, makes a neder, he's not going to eat something. And he thought he'd be able to abide by that vow. And he realizes it's complicating his life. But when he made the neder, he wasn't aware of to what degree it would complicate his life. He goes to the Chacham, or goes before the panel. He says, if I would have known to what degree it would have complicated my life, I would have never made the neder. Meaning, there was a problem in the very inception of the neder. When we made the neder, it was due to an unawareness. That's the reason why he made the neder. So that's hatori. Undoing, like we say, something is mutter. Mutter and also means it's permitted, it's untied, it's available to you. By undoing it, it's like an annulment. That's annulment going back to the very beginning, that the neder was based on a false premise. That's haTorah. Charota, the Ran explains in the Dorim, when you remorse, somebody's upset at someone, and he says, I will never allow you to step into my house. Your house is off limits to me. Or you're off limits to me. Why are you saying it? Because you're upset. When the person is upset, he understands what he's saying. But he's only saying it because he's upset. So he's fully aware from the very beginning. It's not later he realizes he can't abide by it. It's because he said in a state of anger, or whatever that reason is, so he was aware of all the variables. He calms down, he says, I shouldn't have been so hasty. But so that's charata. So it's only as a result, because when a person's angry or upset, we don't think rationally. Although we're aware of all the variables. That's charata. But even that, and the Gemara has a question, could you annul a neder based on charata when you're aware initially of all the variables? We will halacha. You can be matir neder even with charata. You can annul a neder even though the basis is charata, where you're aware of everything. Nevertheless, because there was a change of mind, that's enough to undo the neder. And it's interesting, the halacha is, optimally, the Bezdin, when the matir and neder, and I used to say that the Yad of Rom, that the Bezdin should be aware that the two approaches how to undo a neder. Either it's the first way, haTorah, or it's charata. And when the Bezdin, they say mutter, whatever they say, mutarim, Bezdin shall matter, that they're aware of how, what approach we're undoing the neder. It's either haTorah or charata. Now, when a person sins, why does he sin? Even deliberately, a person knows better. It's because he has a desire. The desire somehow clouds his rational thinking, and he does the wrong thing. That's what it is. So to a degree, you're aware of all the variables, but due to your state of wanting to satisfy desire, that colors your clarity, that clouds it, and therefore you do the wrong thing. It's the same thing. But if you sit down and say to the person, what you're doing, you're acting irresponsibly, because they think you're really doing something to God, and God's aware of it. But again, because you have the desire to do it, that desire clouds our minds, and we cross the line. And we believe we're victimizing God. Moshe Rabbeinu says, you're acting foolishly. You're doing nothing to God. You're victimizing. He says, you're the victim. God's not the victim. That's the way it is. Now, this concept, the next pasuk speaks about being an ingrate. First we say it's foolishness. But now the next pasuk is Hashem tigmuzos. Are you doing this to God? This behavior, is it appropriate behavior? Am novel chochom. You're a despicable people and unwise. You're foolish. Elohu avicho kanechu. Don't you realize who he is? He brought you into existence. He's your father. He kanecha means he founded you. He gave you whatever value you have. He gave it to you. He made you. He secured you. Whatever you are, he did for you. So how do you behave this way? You're behaving as if you're actually steering the ship where he's steering the ship. It's interesting. The Midrash says that when you have a stallion, it has tremendous power. Even a man of war, a horse that they would go to battle with, that the horse was trained that even the horse could kill in battle. The horse would, but how did the horse kill? The rider, the warrior rode the horse, and he would direct the horse by the way he would hold the reins, and he would hold the horse with his legs, and he would direct the horse into battle. So if you look at the horse, its power, you think the horse is leading the rider, but factually the rider is leading the horse. The rider who sits on it, has the reins, and has feet on both sides of the horse, he's the one that's controlled. But if you look power-wise, you think the horse is leading the rider. You look at this world, you think the world goes by itself, and Hashem is not involved in every aspect of this, the function of this existence. This world, whatever it is, as overwhelming it is, the luminaries, the sun, the moon, the oceans, whatever it is, the immense degree of what this existence is, this is only because Hashem is. It looks like it's going by itself. Everything, the laws of nature, everything is exact. But that exactness is all because God's willing that exactness. That's what, and when he chooses to will, it should not be exact, what we call supernaturalness, because every moment he's the one who's actually willing, it should be in that particular order of context. But if he should choose to say do differently, it's different. In fact, the Gemara tells us Reb Chanina ben Dosa, his daughter-in-law, had mistakenly put a wick Erev Shabbos into a canister of vinegar, and she didn't have olive oil for Ner Shabbos, and he comes to, he sees that she's a little down. He says, "What's the problem?" He says, "I put the wick in vinegar." So Rav Chini ben Dosa says, Hashem gozeh shemi yidolik. Just as God decrees that oil should burn, olive oil, he could decree that chometz yidolik, vinegar should burn. Hashem is the same thing. He says, "Why don't you try it?" She lights it, and sure enough, it lights. And not only that, normally the oil candle, Motzei Shabbos, it wasn't burning anymore. If this vinegar candle burned till Motzei Shabbos, they were able to make Havdalah on that light, Motzei Shabbos. Shem Sha'Kodesh Baruch Hu's gozer, Sha'Shem Yidolek Hachul gozer ala Chometz Yidolik. For Hashem, it's all the same. It's only based on what he decrees, what he wills. But we believe that the world is independent of him. It's not the case. But so our behavior, where is our indebtedness to Hashem? He put you on that pedestal. He secures that pedestal. He pays the bills. He underwrites everything. How do you behave this way? It's despicable. It's disgraceful, the behavior. He gave you everything you are. He made you, and he still makes you. So now we're talking about, this is called an ingrate. Our behavior is an ingrate. That we even forget where everything came from and continue coming, that's part of an ingrate. Now, where does this come from? So the Gemara tells us in Avodah Zarah, in the 40th year, we're eating this man, this miracle food for 40 years, and this food nourishes the person. Whatever he has in mind, that food should take on that degree of value. It takes on that degree of value, nourishment-wise, taste-wise. And the Gemara has a Shaila Yuma, not only taste-wise, nourish-wise, even texture-wise. It takes on the texture of the food, whatever you think, whether it's meat, whether it's grain, whatever it is. It takes on that texture. So after 40 years, they say, this is the generation which is about to go into Eretz Yisrael. The old generation passed away over the 40-year period. And they say to Moshe Rabbeinu, we had enough of this lechem haklokel, this wafer food. We have enough. We may die from it. Whoever heard a person ingesting something for 40 years and it goes into the system, doesn't come out? The answer is, there's a ploy. The food this mon is going to expand in our intestines, and ultimately our intestines are going to burst and we're going to die. You have this newfangled craziness they come up with. Hashem immediately sends vipers, and the Jews are bitten by these snakes, and they start dying. Hashem says to Moshe, make a copper snake, so on and so forth, put it on a pole, and the whole, as it says, whoever looked at it and believed and prayed, they were healed. Did it? They died, whatever. So Hashem says, after all I've done for you, don't you realize that the man, that you didn't do your bodily function, all this, it's to accommodate your needs, because normally you'd have to go out of the camp to cover your waste, the human waste. This is such an accommodation you can't understand, and you're claiming that you're going to die from it. You were ingrate, so descend from an ingrate. Who was the first ingrate in the history of the world? Adam Rishon. Hashem creates Chava, who's the Eza Kenegdo, who's the helpmate, the ultimate helpmate. She is the key to his success, that he should be able to focus on everything he's meant to focus on. And now he says to Hashem, he says, why do you eat Eitzadas? Hashem, it's your fault. If you wouldn't given me this wife, I wouldn't have messed up. I wouldn't have failed. Hashem says, you're a kafui tova. You're an ingrate. You're taking something which is all positive and you're turning it around and you point the finger of blame on me. You're an ingrate. So Adam, in his essence, he displayed being the ingrate. The whole sense of indebted, it doesn't. When he wants to do what he wants to do, all of a sudden he becomes this ingrate. After all Hashem has done for us, there's a certain defect in the human being that when that rears its head, when the person wants to do what he wants to for whatever reason, he becomes an ingrate. So I'll do what I want to do. I mean, what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying to Hashem, to Klal Yisrael, Hashem tignusos. How do you do this to God? All that He's done for you, as it says, you're a despicable, disgraceful people, and you're not wise. He's your father who founded you, brought you into existence. He makes you, He wills you, and He secures you. How do you behave this way? What's the answer? You're ingrates. Because when we want to do something, we do what we want to do. And we believe, as the person says, thank God, I am who I am, and I could do my own thing. I don't even need God. Of course, He could interfere, but that's the way people speak. You're missing the point. I don't always say you're missing the boat. You miss the boat, you don't go on that trip. You miss the boat. But why? Because since we have this deficiency called ingrate, whenever we want to do what we want to do, for whatever reason, all of a sudden we have this lapse of clarity and we see it the way we want to see it. That's the way it is. That's exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. It's so obvious and clear. It's irrefutable that you can't see it differently. But nevertheless, that's why it's disgraceful and despicable for you to behave this way. He's your father, brought you into existence. He actually made you, wills you, and secures you. How do you behave this way? There's a famous word from Rabbi Simcha Vinsk in the Tocha, in Parshas B'chokosai. He says, if you track history in terms of the Jews, all the various displacements, exiles we were in, very often were in a location for a while that were driven out of that place with a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. We come to a new location, and afterwards, the Jews themselves, they shore up their Judaism. They become very focused and very careful of how they live as Jews. As they enter into the new society, Jews, they have great capacity. And they start rising up the financial ladder in that society on many levels. And they contribute. And that foreign society values them and compensates them. The more we rise, the more we shed. We begin shedding our Judaism. We become less observant. This is part of Golus. And when we reach, we believe, the pinnacle of our height in power, financially, materially, all of a sudden, we're thrown off the cliff. That's what happens. And this repeats itself continuously. This is the cycle of history, of Jewish history. We rise, and then we fall. We fall, and we realize the mistakes we made, but we repeat the same mistakes over and over. And he says over there in Kosai that the next Holocaust, the next Churban is Germany. Why? Because the Jews say that the Jerusalem of the Jewish people is Berlin. And because that's what they say, that's their source of everything, therefore the next Holocaust is coming from Berlin. As Rabbi Simcha writes, in the early part of the 20th century. So he forecasted what happened. 6 million Jews and worse than that. Okay, but that's it. We have short memories. If we'd only learn from history and see that our misbehavior, we can't get away with it. But again, why do we make the same mistake over and over again? Because the answer is we have this defect. It's called Kofli Tova. And therefore, and the Yitzhara plays that card like you can't imagine. Even Adam, which was almost the perfect creation, failed. We being his descendants, we have this genetic defect. It's called ingrate, and that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was exactly saying to the Klal Yisrael at this moment. We had a Mishnah Elam Mitzias regarding the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveido, returning a lost article. You have your lost article, you have your father's lost article, somebody else's lost article, your father's. Which one, who has priority? Whose lost article should be returned first? Whose Aveido should be returned first? You must return your father before the strangers. Although it's the same mitzvah, same positive commandment. Why? So the Mishnah says, because your father brought you to Chaylim Hazeh. Your father brought you into existence. Whatever you have, even if your father did nothing for you, that he brought you into existence, that you live, that reality, you have a beholdenness to your father. You're indebted to your father. Therefore, returning your father's lost article takes priority over a stranger's lost article. What about if it's your Rebbe and your father? Whose lost article takes priority? Your Rebbe. Why? Because your father brought you into the physical world, and the Rebbe brought you into the eternal world because he taught you Torah. So therefore, the debt, there's a great indebtedness to your Rebbe than to your father. But it's always emphasizing that point. There's an indebtedness. The whole concept of kabedis of vichvesimecho. Honor your father and your mother. Ishav vimutiro, revere your parents. Why? This whole concept continuously reiterating, focusing on this point. Understand where you come from. Even if they did nothing for you, other than bring you into existence, you have an obligation, as the Gemara says in Kedushin, to clothe them, to feed them, to assist them. That's kabed. Reverence is appreciate the value. That's reverence. Always keep that focus, keep that lens clear. But all that is going back to the concept of Hakar Satov. It's addressing the deficiency. Somebody once said that Adam and Eve never had a father. So therefore, they were never conditioned, this whole concept, to understand where they came from. A child that's raised by a parent, you start off, when you're first born, you're helpless. Without their nurturing and everything else, you couldn't survive. You wouldn't exist. Education-wise, clothing-wise, food, everything. So therefore, you have a better chance to understand that you couldn't make it on your own. Adam comes into a perfect existence. He never had the exposure, conditioning, understanding where it come from. Suddenly, he's on top of the mountain. As a result of that, that's why he failed. Because he was never conditioned to understand where he came from, although he knew where he came from. He knew he was a creation, the handiwork of God, and that's why he was vulnerable to the approaches of the Sultan with the Eitz Das for that reason. Somebody once said that Esav, who's the antithesis of Yaakov, nevertheless, regarding kibbud of the aim, honoring his father, he surpassed Yaakov. Now the question is why? Why? Even though somebody said it's not really credible because it has some fallacies in it. Because who is Esav? Esav is Olam Hazeh. Esav represents the physical world. Yaakov is the spiritual world. Esav, in terms of his level of appreciation for physicality, nobody appreciated physicality the way Esav did. That's Esav. As a result of that, when he was born to his existence, he says, where did I get all this from? It's my father. My father, because my father fathered me. And now, Yeshli Rov is because my father brought me into this existence. So his level of indebtedness to his father, he wore his begodim chamudos. When he would serve his father, it was the most regal garments. He wouldn't serve his father with less than that. That was his degree of keep it up. Because he had such a profound understanding of what his father was, because everything in his life, even his desires, only exist because his father provided them, because he brought them to existence. Therefore, his level of indebtedness to his father, because he had such a deep, he was consumed with this appreciation, therefore he behaved that way. In other areas, who's God? Who's what? Although he's raised with it. But what's his reality? His reality is his father. I'm here because my father brought me into existence. That's where it began. That's where it ends. The same idea. And he believed, that the world's his world to do whatever he wants. But who provided the world? That's his world. His father. It's like a person has an inheritance. And whatever he has, whatever he does is only due to that inheritance. He only sings the praises of his father because he knows that's undeniable fact. It's only because he was the heir of all this wealth. It's interesting. Rabbi Shol Salanter was known that he was the greatest, besides being the Gadol Hador, leading Torah sage of his generation, he was known as the greatest genius of his generation, Rabbi Shol Salanter. And he was an orator also, tremendous speaker. He had a presence. And he had a son, unfortunately, who became a Mechalel Shabbos. And his son went to the University of Petrograd. And his son had introduced quantum physics, and he wrote a thesis. And although he was a Jew, and the Tsar was a rabid anti-Semite, it was unheard of that a Jew should receive any commendation for any level of accomplishment. He received an award from the Tsar because nobody could hold up a candle to him in the field of mathematics and physics. Rabbi Shol's son. And I tell the story in the past. But whenever Rabbi Shol's son would speak among his colleagues, which were all Gentiles, because they didn't even admit a Jew into the university, he'd always speak to them about his father in glowing terms, with the greatest level of reverence, as if he's nothing compared to his father. So they would say, what are you talking about? Your father's an archaic, backward Jew. What are you talking about? We see who you are, but your father, who is he? What is he? So he says, he's speaking about my father. If you'd only know who my father was, you wouldn't speak you are. He says to his colleague, you're working on a thesis for 3 years, something to do also in mathematics. He says, if you go to my father and present the question, in 5 minutes, he'll write the thesis, he'll sketch it on a piece of paper, and that will be your thesis. It's impossible. He's never heard of such a thing. Let's travel. Let's travel to Vilna. Rabbi Shol Salanter was in Vilna at the time. They traveled to Vilna. And he comes in with his colleague, and he introduces him. Looks like some kind of person from another era, backward. And he presents he explains to his father what the man wants, and he thinks for a moment, takes the pen, the quill, scratches some scribble on a paper, and he says, "Yeah, that's the answer. That's the solution." The man nearly passed out. Rabbi Shol Salanter, although his son unfortunately went off, but nevertheless, in terms of he understood who his father was, and because he understood who his father was, it was so imprinted and emblazoned in his mind, he was totally negated to his father. I wouldn't have the audacity to even think for a moment that I understand better than my father understands. So when this Gentile made the comment that his father's a backward person, and what could he understand? What does he understand? He couldn't tolerate it. A Jew who lives as a Jew is supposed to live. What's Chil Hashem? A Jew is committed to God. If God forbids Chil Hashem, he can't tolerate it. He's pained. Because since we internalize the value of Hashem in our lives, when we see something which is contradictory to that or disgraceful to that, you're pained by it. And you react to it, or you should react to it. And everybody has different levels of reaction. As a result, and that's the reason why the Gemara tells us, the Churban Bayis, Rishon, it's Gemara Shabbos, that Hashem says to the Malcham Ovis, that all the Rishonim, you should take the letter Tuf, paint it on their foreheads in red, and the Tzadikim in black. If you're in the red, means you die. If you're in the black, that means you live. So the Midas Adin says to Hashem, why not the Tzadikim? They deserve also the letter Tuf in red. So Hashem says, why? So Why? Because they should have protested. They should have been mocher. So Hashem says, but if they would have been mocher, even if they would have protested, it would have fallen on deaf ears. It would have fallen on deaf ears. So there's no culpability. So the tzaddik should be black. So the Midas Adin says, but did they know that that protest would fall on deaf ears? How did they remain silent and watch all this going on? If they would know it falling on deaf ears, so it's a reaction of futility. But if you don't know, how do you remain silent? Remain silent means you're being indifferent because it doesn't make a difference. How could it not make a difference? There's a chil Hashem going on. How do you remain silent? So the silence is the basis for the condemnation. You deserve to be condemned. How are you not in pain? Same idea. Rabbi Yisrael's son couldn't tolerate this Gentile saying, your father's not backward Jew. What could he understand? That's what he talked about my father. If you understand who my father is, he was pained to the point is, we're going to Vilna and I'll prove my point. Others say, what did we say? Let him think what he believes. It's irrelevant what he thinks about my father. No. If you put my father, you frame him in that frame, it's unacceptable. I can't tolerate it. So if somebody paints HaKadosh Baruch Hu or behaves in a way as if he's irrelevant, you can't deal with it. You react, you paint. And if you're not pained, it's a problem. And that's the litmus test.
Rabbi.
What's the objective of creation? The objective of creation is the word is shleimus. The world should achieve a level of perfection. Why? Because anything which is less than perfect cannot have relevance to Hashem himself. Hashem is perfect on the absolute level. Therefore, a man, his choice and his actions, the ramifications is not only does he perfect himself, he perfects the world. Because Hashem responds to our perfection, because the world was created to facilitate the objective of man to achieve perfection. So if we succeed in our choices, Hashem infuses the world with bracha to facilitate, to allow us to achieve that level of perfection. If we fail, we shut the lights off. We close the lights. All of a sudden there's a brownout, there's a blackout. Things become very confusing. And ultimately, sometimes Hashem will cause it to become so painful that will be the basis. Put the lights back on. That's tshuva, as we just read recently. When you're going to be in exile, so on and so forth, and you're going to start asking questions, you can do tshuva. That's what happens. But the ultimate goal is the world should achieve a level of perfection, and man should achieve a level of clarity. And only once that happens, and the world recognizes, then Hashem says, now we're ready to do it over again. We're ready to create a new existence, a new world. And those who succeeded until that point, before Mashiach comes, they will be part of that new existence, that new creation. That is basically the direction how to understand it. You can't have a relationship with God unless you have some degree of perfection, because there has to be a commonality with Hashem. So choice, by making the right choices, as he chooses what the right choices are, that is the basis for the commonality. The greater the commonality, the greater the relationship. And the ultimate is the world has to end on that note. And that's the Mashiach. And when Mashiach comes, and there's no questions. And all mankind who's going to be there will behave serving. That becomes the reality. And that's the Ramban that we just read. God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your children. That will undo the effect of the Eitz Hadas. The effect of the evil will be expunged from us. And as a result of that, naturally we'll do the will of God till the end of time, and then the world ends, and then the new world begins. Okay.
So, Rabbi, what's the concept of
Mark Goldstein. I don't know if he's still on.
He's on, but not video.
Okay. Good, Jay.
When the Rav mentioned shlemus, so what's the concept, or how should we think about doing one mitzvah in your whole life b'shlemus?
We spoke about that. That's the Rambam. The Rambam says, "Ratzak Hashem zakas Yisrael b'Torah mitzvahs. Ratzak zakas Yisrael b'Torah Torah mitzvahs." That's the famous Rambam in the Pirush Mishnayos. God wanted to bring us merit. We should be meritorious. Therefore, He gave us an abundance of Torah mitzvahs. So the Rambam asks, if the more we have, the more likely there's more to fail. Let Him give us less, and as a result of that, we have a better chance to succeed. So the Rambam says, "There's the Rambam." What you're saying now, that as much as you fail, but if you have a greater variety of mitzvahs, and even if you do one of them perfectly, b'shlemus once in a lifetime, you've already succeeded to have that special place in the world to come. Because to achieve shlemus, even when we do the mitzvah, it's really far-fetched. So by giving us endless opportunities, as much as we're going to fail because we have so many opportunities, but even if we succeed once in a lifetime, any of these areas, then you've made it over the top. Because you achieved shlemus. That's the Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos. It's a Makos.